Okay, that's the challenge for today. Okay, so today we're going to do React. This is day 2 of React, and I'm going to kind of walk through making. There's an application started, which is fairly simple, so maybe we can just explain that. And then what we're going to end up doing is we're going to refactor this. We're going to change a couple things around and add a couple things. And the point of this is to show you what's called lifting state. So it's often the case as you're designing React applications, you'll find this is a common pattern if you write a few React applications, that you start writing stuff and you have all these components and you have your component hierarchy and everything's looking good. And then all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, something that I'm changing in this component over here actually needs to trigger a change in a component over here. But these components are at the same level and there's no way for them to interact. So there's a way to solve that problem, which is to basically pull everything up that you need into a common parent or common ancestor component. So that's all abstract now, and we'll take a look at what that means. But before we do that, let's just see if we can get familiar with this particular application. So I have this already set up and running. So the main entry point for any React application, it's actually going to be an index, but you really almost never need to worry about this. So here is the app component and the root component here. So where is this root component?
Index.html.
Yeah. So if we look at public index.html, we can see that there's just a bunch of stuff in here, and this HTML page is basically just this. The whole body is essentially this div, this empty div with an ID of root. So this ID of root in the index.js, you can see where your React application is. So first off, we're grabbing that element. So we're grabbing that root div, and then this React, you don't need to worry about what this does, but React DOM is basically grabbing that and then shoving your entire React application into that div. So that's essentially where what app is. So we go to the app component. So this app component is, for all intents and purposes, this is where you start writing a React application. So we have this app component, and it's a class. So there are functional components and class components. We'll look more at functional components later, but for today, we're just gonna look at classes. So this is a class component. So what's the minimum that a class component needs?
Return.
Need a parent like a div. Everything's
Okay.
gotta be inside of a div.
Okay, right. So there is going to be a return statement. The answer I'm looking for is a render method. So the minimum thing that every component, that every component that you have that extends from React's component is going to require a render method. If you're using functional components, that's not the case, but for class-based components, you need a render method, and that render method is going to return something. And what that render method returns is going to be JSX, which looks like HTML. So one important rule to keep in mind for what this returns is that it can only return a single element. So is this a single element?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it is, because there's one div here. There's one top level component. Within this div are other things, and that's fine, but you can do one. What you can't do is another P. That's not gonna work because I have two components now. So I can put another P tag inside of this, but I can only have one. Okay, so this app returns a div, and that div has a P tag in it. So far we're just in basically normal JavaScript or HTML territory. Here's where things get different. So this color changer. So without even looking at color changer, what can you tell me about it?
It's going to change the color or something.
Probably, yeah.
It's a component.
Yep.
It's got a prop on it called title.
Okay, good. Yeah, so this looks like an HTML tag, but it's really, you can think of it as an instance of this class. It's really like an instance of this class. We're creating an instance, and when we create an instance, we're gonna start it off with some stuff. So if this were Python, this would be in the init, or JavaScript, this would be in a constructor. But we're creating an instance of this color changer class component, and we're passing in this prop. So there are two kinds of, let's say, I don't know, two kinds of really important entity in React. There's prop, and then props, and then what else?
State.
Right. So what's the difference between props and state?
State's kind of specific to a component, and it allows you to change something about that component, like inside of the component, without I guess without any additional GET requests or post requests or reloading the page. It kind of changes it right there on the front end.
Okay.
And then props can be passed from component to component.
Okay, good. Yeah, so state is, let's say, information that belongs to a given component, and that information really it's almost like private information. So if the state of a given component changes, then that will actually trigger a re-render. We'll talk about re-renderings, but that's how things change. If you trigger a re-render, then what you see on the page will change. It doesn't actually have anything to do with making API calls, because you get the React application, and what you actually get, we're developing a React application, but what you ultimately will get served up as a client is just HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And when you click on something, a page built in React, it will use ultimately the same low-level stuff that you would use if you just used vanilla JavaScript. But so state is for changing something within a component. Props is for passing information from one component to another component, but it's not quite as loose as that. So props can only go from a parent to a child. So you can't directly pass information from a child to a parent in React. You can't pass information from a child to a parent, and you can't pass information from one sibling to another. So those are pretty big restrictions. It's possible to get around them, and we're basically going to look at how you get around that restriction. But that exists. So props pass information from a parent to a child. State changes information within a component. Okay. So now let's look at the color changer. Scroll down. So there's a few more things happening here. One, we have state. So in the app.js, we don't have state. So state is optional. If you have a class-based component, you don't have to define state, but you can. So that's here. And state is just an object. You can have lots of different things. Yeah, it's just a normal object. Then we have our obligatory render method, because this is also a class-based component that extends from React's component. And our render ultimately is going to return something. And what it returns is going to be JSX. So we have a single element. In this case, it's a div, and then a p tag, and then a button. So when we created app.js, we essentially created our instance of color changer and we passed it this title. If we want to access that, if we want to use that information in the component, this is how we do it. This, which refers to color changer, the color changer instance, this.props. So notice that we didn't define anything called props. That just exists automatically because it's extending from React's component. So in order to grab this kind of this property, the props, we're going to have to call this.props. And then whatever you call it. So title comes from this right here. So this is arbitrary. You can call this whatever you want, but whatever you call it here is going to be this.props. Whatever. And then you can, inside the render, you can do normal JavaScript stuff. So here, just defining an object called styles. And this is one way of adding CSS to React. There's a couple other ways. So you can do it basically inline here. And we'll look at some other ways later, but so a couple differences. CSS, one, naming conventions are a little different. So background color, it's not background dash color, it's camel case background color. Class in CSS is class name, just because, you know, class is a keyword in JavaScript, so you can't use it. So there's a couple minor differences there that aren't really too troubling, but just so you're aware of that. And then this button has an event handler. So there's an onClick, and that's going to call this.handleClick, which is right here. So this handle, if someone clicks on this handleClick function will get called, this handleClick method will get called, and it will call this.setState. So again, we don't define this. This comes for free because we're inheriting here. So this.setState. So we're going to change it from whatever it is, red to green. Are there any questions about any of that?
Your set state variable, that's simply because it's just the variable that you named the initial state, correct? That can be any variable, such like if you were to use input or anything like that, it would just be set whatever variable it is, correct, in order to change it?
Yeah, exactly. So something would be, you can have this, and then we could change that here. So we could change both at the same time. Do that something. You could also just have you might have other events that you're watching out for, and you might change that. So you can change these things separately. You don't have to change everything in state all at once or anything like that. I'll just take that out. Okay, so let's run the app npm start. Okay, so not very exciting, but we can see right here, welcome to React, color changer component, and then we have our button. So if I click this, the color changes from red to green, because when I click this, I call this .handle click, and changes this .state .background color from red to green. And where is background color being used? This .state .background color, that's the styles. So it's the CSS property here, which changes here. So how does that work? So I have this component, which is somehow, being turned into JavaScript or HTML, which is loaded on my browser. And then I click this, and then like the color actually changes.
It's just
So
DOM manipulation, right?
Yes, yeah, yes, it is. It is DOM manipulation, and React is managing all of that. So we know how to do DOM manipulation ourselves. We can grab an element and then change a property on it. So we've done that before with vanilla JavaScript. So it's not, it's not entirely clear how React does it, but it does do it. And there are a couple rules, so we'll see. So there's when you change state, you trigger a re-render. So when you call this click event, this handle click method gets called, which runs this .set state, which changes our state. And when the state of a component changes, React knows, okay, this component state has changed, therefore I need to re-render it, which basically means create a new instance of this color changer class, but with this being green instead of red. So you can think of a re-render as creating a new instance with the updated properties. So re-rendering is something you'll have to pay attention to as you start developing apps, because React can be kind of tricky. It's easy to kind of go into an infinite loop where you're just re-rendering after a re-render triggers a re-render, which triggers a re-render, and so on. So you'll run into that.
So
yeah.
If you had several components that were on that page, it would just change the part of the page where the component you're trying to manipulate, like that button, is the only thing on the page that would change.
Right.
And
so
it wouldn't have to reload the whole page, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So React, this is one of the things that kind of React does. It's one of the main things that React does is it will try to minimize. We'll try to change things on the DOM as efficiently as possible. And I don't understand the internals, but what they do is they create a virtual. So you have the actual DOM, right? The DOM is all of the HTML nodes. It's basically like a tree. So that represents the page you're looking at. React creates a virtual DOM, which is an in-memory representation of that, which is much faster. So it's faster to change and manipulate and access. And React will basically match up the virtual DOM to the DOM, and it will do things efficiently. So sometimes if you have a couple different changes to make, it will group them together so it does it all at once. So it's not, yeah. So unfortunately, I don't understand all of the details, but that's how it works. Okay, so
Magic.
yes, magic. So triggering re-renders, one way of triggering a re-render is changing a state. So, changing the state that will trigger a re-render, which is essentially creating a new instance of a component with the updated value. The other is that if I change the props. So for example, app is giving color changer props. So this title prop. So if this prop changes, and the way we have this now, this wouldn't change, but if this changed, then this component would also re-render. So if state changes, it will re-render the component. If props change, it will also trigger a re-render of any component that depends on the props. So you don't need to worry about all of that right now, but it helps to understand the structure of React. Another good way of understanding how things are connected in React is the React DevTools. So you have to install this separately, but if you look up React DevTools, it should be pretty easy to find and install. So the React DevTools give you access to a couple things. One is the components. So I'm gonna look at the components right here, and I can see that I have an app and I have color changer. So app is the top level component. And notice there's an entry for props, tells me what it's rendered by, and so on. So I don't need to worry about all this right now, but I can see the hierarchy. So app renders color changer, and color changer has props, and I can look at those props. Color changer, I can actually change them here if I wanted to do. So I just got rid of that. So if you want to see, what would happen if the props were different, what would happen if my state changed. So you can change this up here. So it's nice for debugging. And then it tells you that it's rendered by app. and this tells you rendered by app, rendered by create group. And then here's the source. So app.js line 12. So I go back to app line 12. That's where this is coming from. So it's helpful for debugging and looking at all that stuff. Okay. So in addition to that, there's also the other thing you get is this profiler. And the profiler is also handy for letting you know like how things are connected and what the flow is. We just have two components, so it's not that big a deal. But so the first thing you probably want to do is you go into the settings and you go to profiler, this profiler tab. Just click on record while each component rendered while profiling. By default, that's not checked. So if you check that, then you come here and record basically. So you'll start recording and then you interact with your app, and then you can see how things were flowing. So I'll start recording. So I'll refresh, change the color, and I'll stop. I guess I didn't do that. Okay, let me try that one more time. So I've refreshed. I'm going to start recording. Click that and stop. Okay, so this, when you read this app, it's gray, so that tells me that it didn't render. So I had the app loaded already, and then I clicked this button, but the app didn't change. So my app component didn't render, which means that basically it didn't re-render. So I changed the state of my color changer component because I clicked the button which changes the state here. So I changed the state of that, but the parent component didn't need to re-render. The child, the state of the child changed, but the parent doesn't need to worry about that. So the app doesn't render, but the color changer did. So I can take a look at that. You can see how long it took and so on. It tells you, if you click that option, why did it render? State changed. So it tells you that the current background color, the state changed. And that's why this component re-rendered. So I think these tools are good to, it's good to help you understand how a React application is actually structured. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, so I'm going to go back to the components, and we're going to do, I'm going to try, I see that, let me see that in the new version of Zoom, there's a whiteboard feature. I just want to see if I can see that here. I didn't see that as an option. Let me try one thing, sorry. Here we go. Can you guys see my whiteboard?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna give this a try. All right. So yeah, we'll kind of try to keep the structure of the React application in mind as we're modifying it. So the first is app, and then that as it is right now, we have under that, we have the change, what is it? Change color changer. So here's our structure. So parent, child. Do an arrow. Yeah. Okay. So app to color changer, and color changer has its own state. So let's say we're starting to develop this app and we're looking at it and we want to do some refactoring. So we say, okay, well, this color changer has a button in it, and I think I could probably pull out that button and do its own component. This is the kind of thing you'll do in React, so let's just go ahead and do it. Let's create a new component called button. And then the boilerplate that you're going to need is import. I'm getting some autofill stuff here. So
we still just see your whiteboard.
oh, okay. Okay, you guys can see this now.
Yes.
Okay, so I am looking at this and I'm thinking, button could probably be its own component. So I create another component called button, and then I start importing stuff. So I'm importing component. So the syntax here, I could alternatively do, what is it? React from. I can also import React and then do like when I extend it, React.component. But here I'm going to pull out component, and this is that destructuring syntax that we saw earlier. So the import is basically an object, and component is a key in the React object. So instead of doing React.component, we can just pull out component if we destructure the import. So we'll do that component, and then we'll create a class. So class button extends component. And the one method that I have to have on the class component is render. And that will return some JSX. And then I'm also going to export, because I need to import that later. So export default button. Okay, so I got my button here, and so I'm going to copy this. And I need the style, so I'm also going to copy this thing. Get rid of that. Okay, so I've got the basics, and the button has this handle click, so I'm also going to take that. So I got the handle click, and that handle click depends on the state, so I'm going to have to take that as well. Okay. Tighten it up a little bit so it's easier to see. All right. So now my color changer component is pretty stripped out. So it's the only thing that's doing now is displaying a title, which is fine. So now I have my button pulled out and everything that has to do with my button pulled out. So it should work just as before. There's one other thing I have to do. So I have app, which is rendering color changer. And color changer is going to have to render button. So I can put that here, button, and I get the auto import. So import button, the class button from the button file. And I put my JSX here. Do I need any props for button? I don't think so. Okay, so I can just render it like this. I don't need any props. So let's see what our app looks like now. I can change it. So it looks exactly the same. It behaves exactly the same, but the structure is different now. So look at app, color changer. Color changer hasn't changed. It still has this title as a prop, which it's getting from app. But now color changer is rendering button. So you can see the hierarchy shown here with the indentation. So button has state, these two items of state here, and it's rendered by color changer, which is rendered by app, which is rendered by this create group. Okay. And if let's go back to let's switch back to the whiteboard. Why didn't it save that? Okay, I have to try to save that. So app, and then we have color changer, and then we have our new component, which is button. Draw the arrows. Okay, so here's the structure of our application now. I'm gonna try and save this. Can I save this thing? Oh man, that's rough. I gotta build it every time. All right, so be it. So here's the structure of our app now. We have app, color changer, button. So let's say now we, okay, so another thing to keep in mind is that our state, this will be a circle. So our state kind of belongs to button, which is the, let's just say color. So our state belongs to button. It was here, now it's here. And the handler is also, the handler to change the color is also on button. But now what we want to do is we need to have a another component, which is going to, this is just kind of a dummy example, obviously, but the component is going to be responsible for displaying the text of the color. So we have now kind of a, let's say, a clash where button is controlling. So button has all the information about, you know, what the background color is. But button is supposed to only worry about the button. So one thing we could do is, if we want to add this additional component, which is displaying the current color as text, we could just throw it in button. But the downside of that is that button will now become more crowded. So it's not really just a button component, it's a button and display text component. So what we have to do is we have to add another component. Do that. We want to add a display color component, but we want display color to change based on the state of button. But we know that state is purely internal. So button is the only thing. We do another bigger box. So this state belongs to button, and that's it. So nothing else can see or change or do anything with this state. But display color needs that information. So how do we do that? We're going to have to use basically a trick. So we know that we can pass props down, and we know that state can only change a particular component. And props can be anything. Props can be anything, and we know that functions are anything. So there's a long chain of kind of yeah, so there's a long chain of reasoning there, but basically what we're going to do is we are going to pass a function, the event handler function, the function that changes the state. We're going to pass that down as a prop to another component, but it's going to control, it's basically just going to be a reference. It's actually going to be controlling the function here. So the state change will happen within one component, and then that whatever the current state is can get passed then as a prop down here. So let's sketch that out. That is probably very confusing. Let me get rid of this box, and I'm going to add another one. So we're going to have to add a we're basically going to have to, so we started with, getting out of control of this thing. We started with state in the color changer, and then we pushed it down because we were refactoring. Now we're basically going to have to push it right back up and restructure this a little bit. So button is going to go over here, and display color is going to come up here. So these are siblings. And now we're going to have two arrows. One's going to go here. Another one's going to go here. And state is gonna have to stay up here because that's the rule, right? And our state handler, I'll add another one, I guess this would be a diamond. So our handler and the state, so the thing that changes the state and the state are all going to be fundamentally belong to color changer. What we're going to have to do is pass a reference handler. Change the color here. Maybe not. Handler ref. So we're gonna have to pass a handler reference from color changer to button, so that when someone clicks on the button, we can activate this function, which is actually contained in color changer. So we're gonna pass down a reference to the handler, and then when color changes, we're gonna, whatever the current state is here, we're gonna pass that down as a prop to display color. So color changer is actually going to get color. I guess I'll put that right here. It's actually going to get color, but it's going to be, you know, as props. Yeah. I'll do gray. Yeah. Okay. So we have like the reference to the handler being passed from color changer to the button, so that the button can use it. And then we have color changer passing whatever the state is as a prop down to display color. So this allows us to essentially make these sibling components dependent on each other without violating the rules of React. Any questions about that? I'm sure that it's very confusing. Well, let's do it just so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so we have our app color changer button. So what we're gonna have to do now is we're gonna add another component. And this is gonna be called I'm gonna do the same boilerplate. So from, let's say import component from React. Then I'm going to create a, so if you have some of the extensions, I think there's a React extension, you can do shortcuts. So CC is a class-based component. There's a whole bunch of versions. We'll look at these. Component did catch, these are lifecycle methods, so we'll look at that later. But so you can kind of get a boilerplate class going. So I'll use that. You don't have to use that. It's probably good to type it out for the first couple times, but we'll do display color. And we'll get rid of the state for now. So this gives us the render method and the return, and we're going to put some JSX in here. Okay. So we have our app.js and then color and the color changer. And we know that all of this stuff in button is going to have to get pulled up to color changer, because color changer is going to have to render a button, and also it's going to do the display color, which we're going to import right here. So we import display color. So this color changer is now going to render these two components. And let's just, for now, we'll return some stuff. And and then button. Okay, let's see if that. So visually, this is not so clear, like how this is actually structured, which is one reason to use the DevTools. You can clearly see that there's app, which is rendering color changer, and then color changer has two children, which are siblings, button and display color. So button and display color. All right, and we want to make we basically want to make display color dependent on the state of button. So we're gonna have to pull up that information into the parent, which is color changer. So buttons stuff is gonna get moved up again. So I'm gonna move state and the handle click back up to color changer. And then let's see. I think the other stuff can stay like that for now. Let's see here. Yeah, I was gonna do, so I don't wanna go over input. So let me add something else real quick. Actually, no, I think that'll be fine. Okay, so I've got my color changer, the handle click here, and then the button and the display color. So what I'm gonna have to do is button is going to need, it's still gonna need to like change the state, right? It needs a function. It basically needs a reference to this function so that it can change this state. And once it changes this state, this component can pass down the new state as a prop to display color. So right off the bat, we know that display color is going to get a prop. We can call that okay, so we're passing down this state as a prop to display color. So display color can now use this. We can do and how do I access that?
This dot prop dot display color.
Okay, so let's see here. Getting an error. Okay. Let me check this out again. Color changer, current background color. So the button, let me check out button real quick. Yeah, I'm going to comment this out for now. And this dot state, so this does not have state. So this is also going to have to get yeah, I'll change this now. Props dot background, current background color, and I will change this here as well. So this is also going to get the same prop. All right, let's see if that renders. Okay, and I can look at my DevTools here. So I have color changer, which now has this prop that's getting passed in from app. It has state, which is the current background color of red. And button is getting red as a prop, and its display color is also getting red as a prop. So state looks good, and the props look good. So let's take a look at this dot props dot display color, I think. That was not. That's called current color. This dot props dot current. Okay, so the mistake that I was making right there was that I was. So this is how you refer to it within the component. So whatever you call it here is how you're going to refer to it. So within display color. So this prop will be current color. So how that's showing up properly here. So I'll do the same thing for the button. So this dot props dot current color. And the background color is actually red. Okay, so this button exists, but I don't have any, on-click handler, so we'll have to fix that. And so I also can't change anything in the display color. So the basics are set up here. I know that button is going to get whatever this is as a prop, and so is display color. So what I need to happen now is button needs to trigger a state change here in this color changer component. So I'm gonna have to pass a reference to this function down into button. So I'm gonna do that here. So you can call it whatever you want. I'll just give it the same name. This dot handle click. So now button can actually call this function here in the color changer component and change the state here. So if I go to button, now I have access to this new prop, this dot handle click, which is going to be just called handle click. So if I go into button, I can add back on my on click. It's not going to be just handle click, but this dot props dot handle click. I'm going to save that. And now if I click, both of these components change. So I can refresh this again. I can see that color changer, the parent component, now has the state. And also has, so it has the state, and it also has the event handler, the handler function that can change the state. Button has as props basically the state, which is red, the current color. And it also has this handle click function. So I can see in the DevTools, in the React DevTools, that this is a function. So this handle click function. And then in display color, I'm just getting the current color. So now if I change this, so the props changed, notice, because display color is receiving this as props. And then button, of course, also changed as well. So the way this works is we start with app. So app will render everything the app renders, which includes this component, color changer. So color changer will in turn also render, which is whatever it does, which includes display color and button. Display color is kind of a leaf component. It doesn't render any other components, and same with button. So if the state of color changer changes, then it's going to trigger color changer will basically, there's going to be a new instance of color changer that gets created. And color changer, because it renders these components, these child components will also get re-rendered. So they'll get updated with the handle click reference should still be the same, but this dot state that current background color will have changed, right? So if I click on it, the state will change. A new color changer instance will get created with the background color of green, which means that when this in turn renders these two components, these are going to be updated to green, which means that display color, this dot props dot current color will now be green. So we can look at that. We can see that happening through the components. We can also see that happening with the profiler. So I'll refresh this and I'll get rid of this thing. Okay, so I'm going to start recording. Click that and then stop recording. And we can see that app didn't render because it had already rendered and nothing, app doesn't have any state. So app has no state and it's not taking in any props that have changed. So app doesn't need to change. Color changer did change, and it changed because the state changed, as we saw before. And button changed. Why did it change? Because its props changed. So originally button had state in it and it changed because its state changed. Now it's changing because of its props. So the current color here, color changer changes state, re-renders, which means that button now has new props. So that re-renders. And where's the other one? Yeah, display color, same story. So display color gets new props, so it re-renders as well. So any questions about that? I know it's confusing and there's a lot happening, but there are, if you understand what state is, you don't have to have a deep understanding. You just know that, if I want to change something, then I put it in state. And if you know that props are information that can get passed from a parent to a child component, and this basically trick or pattern that will allow dependencies among child components, then that's like 90% of what you need to know for React.
I'm kind of curious how the syntax changes if handle click had arguments you would pass to it.
Yeah, so you could do that. So you could have an arg, something. We could even make that here. I'm trying to avoid using input right now because I don't want to add another complication, but handle click here. So then handle click, this gets passed to button. So button, you have a couple options. One would be to just directly kind of inline, make this an arrow function. It would call a handle click with whatever argument you had. Let's see if that works. So now the color is purple. That's the same. Or you could have a wrapper function that would, more realistically, you would want to get that from something else. So you'd have another state change or another property somewhere else that would, where this value would be coming from dynamically. So you could have another function like so you can do something like that, and then whatever the arg is, so that would be another thing.
So
Yeah.
you passed that argument to the button component, but when you rendered it, it looked like it also changed the display color component.
Yes,
Even if you pull the argument into one of those adjacent apps, when it re-renders, the other one will take that as well.
yeah. So this, I mean, yeah, so this information is here, but this function doesn't belong to this component. This is just a reference to the actual function here, which is going to get called in color changer. So it's still like everything is happening. Color changer is controlling everything. It has all the information and it's controlling everything. It's kind of lending button the ability to change its state. So color changer is lending button the ability to change color changer's state. And it's doing that because when color changer's state changes, display color needs to be updated.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. I'll stop here. Yeah.